Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to APQC's webinar, Accelerating KM, Getting to Know Our 2020 KM Conference Speakers. This webinar will provide a preview of some of the sessions that will be at APQC's 2020 KM Conference and our Accelerate Your KM Journey track. Before we get started, just a few things to keep in mind. You can tweet about today's webinar using the hashtag KMAPQC. All lines are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, you can enter those at any time in the Q&A window at the right of your screen for us to respond to later in the call. We'll have 30 minutes for this session, but we will try to get to some of the audience questions that have come through. And at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our host today, Lauren Tree.
Thank you, Zakia. And I know we have limited time today, and I want to spend as much time as possible with our conference speakers. But I want to spend just a couple of minutes framing our conversation about accelerating the development of a KM program. And we see some programs take off and show value very quickly, where others stall or move very slowly. And we've actually done some research over the years about the foundational capabilities that are most associated with a KM program successfully growing and maturing. So I just wanted to share a little bit of that briefly with our audience today. And I've listed all of the accelerators that we've defined in our research on the next few slides. But for the purposes of this conversation, I want to highlight just a few themes. First of all, you need to document your strategy, have a clear idea of your goals, and also how those goals are going to deliver value, and ultimately some sort of ROI for the business. And then you also need to bring both senior leaders and business representatives into both strategy development and the execution. People support what they help create, and we find that that's critical to building a solid foundation for KM. And then in terms of processes and approaches and technology, organizations go in all different directions, but there are two real themes in our research. The first is doing your homework with tools like knowledge mapping, IT needs assessments. There's a wide variety of tools that you can use to figure out what you need to put in place to meet your goals. So some way to align your strategy and your tactics. And then the second is really around standardization. We see a lot of organizations with these little pockets of excellence of knowledge management. But if you really want to maximize the value that you're delivering and break down silos across the organization, you need to scale your processes to cover more of the enterprise, if not the whole enterprise, with what you're doing in KM. And then finally, you need to formalize your change management and communication and to clearly define key performance indicators and measures in line with your goals. And you also need to do some soul searching, some benchmarking, some ongoing assessment to make sure that your goals are still the right goals, especially as you progress to your 2, 3, 4, do we want to head towards the same thing? And then also that you're doing the right things to achieve those goals, especially as technology changes and processes change. You need to constantly reevaluate and realign those things. So those are just a few thoughts from our research around, how you accelerate this KM journey. Without further ado, I really want to jump into our conversation with our two conference speakers. We have, first of all, Tosin Arava, who is from Swagelok. And then we also have Lindsay Clausen from US Pharmacopoeia. And they're both going to be talking about their KM strategies and program development at APQC's KM conference. So hi, Tosin. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning. And, I want to kind of jump into how you guys have achieved success, especially in a relatively short period of time with KM, starting with how you engaged leaders and got their buy-in and sponsorship, because I often think that is an important first step. So Lindsay, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you engaged leaders and got them to believe in this thing called KM and support it?
Certainly, yes. So we found that from what we learned from APQC, from talking with others, that it was really important to start simple and meaningful. So it really helped to build that business case when we started with our critical work processes first. So that was the focus of our initial KM pilots and planning. And that really helped them to see the benefit that they would get to those bottom line business results by starting on a very focused set of objectives rather than trying to cover everything all at once.
Tosin, what about you? What was most valuable in terms of engaging leaders and getting their buy-in?
Yeah, so one of the things that kind of worked out for us was we had a leader at the time who believed that it was the right thing to do. So it was the vice president for our department at the time, and he was willing to dedicate resources to knowledge management. And so that helped us in such a way that he made it important to keep the CEO informed of what we were doing, so that way, the CEO was aware and he could support it as needed. And at the time, we met with the CEO quarterly just to give him updates as well. Now, where the buy-in and the engagement was really needed was more from the business itself. And so what we were able to do was we were able to engage with other leaders, but it had to be based on what was critical to the business and the results that they were looking for. And that, I think, was what helped from a leadership perspective.
Excellent. So did either of you have to have any conversations with a really skeptical business group or a skeptical leader? And was there anything that kind of helped you in that conversation? Because it's one thing to say we're going to focus on critical knowledge, but how do you make that connection to the business?
Yes, I think just to follow up on what Tosin said, it's about addressing their problems. And where I saw previous efforts that didn't take off so well, it was more like this was a solution in need of a problem. And so it was trying to force KM where people didn't see the need. And so those conversations where I did have pushback, they were coming from that prior experience that they said, why do I have to go through all these hoops? I have so many other priorities to focus on. I don't have time to spend on, filling out some sheets or things like that. So they had maybe some prior misconceptions about what knowledge management would be. And so when instead I started with, well, what are the problems that you're facing and how might I help you solve them? That accomplished a much better, more productive conversation.
Yeah, so maybe just to add to that, I think, very similarly is we had an instance where it would have been challenged, initially it was just, get that buy-in. But I think what was important was helping them understand that we were on the same team, essentially. And so you are looking at not someone telling you what to do or how to do it. You're looking at individuals who are passionate about helping you be successful and helping your knowledge flow the way it needs to be, helping you identify what gaps exist and, hopefully be able to help you solve those problems. So I think just making sure that we were seen as critical or as business partners, it just made a big difference. And then one other thing I would add to that was, I know, Lindsay, you touched on, we don't have the time, the resources and things of that nature. We just came back with, well, we'll provide the resources. We'll whatever you need, we're here to help you out. And I think that helped a lot.
Sure.
So obviously buy-in is a first big piece here. Once you kind of have that green light, what do you see as the critical success factors that enabled you to get knowledge management off the ground relatively quickly and to start delivering value? Because I think for both of you, that is something that you've been able to achieve in a relatively short period of time, to be able to show some quick wins where you're actually delivering value to the business. So Tosin, do you want to start on this one?
Absolutely, thank you. So just looking at this question, again, I think this is an interesting question. And I say that because I think getting KM off the ground is one thing, and I liked how you worded it. But I think in hindsight, now looking back, it took us a while to deliver value. And I say that because we then had to get to a critical point where we had to stay focused. So we were trying to do a lot too fast, and we were everything to everyone. And that doesn't quite work well, especially from a KM perspective, where it helps to stay focused. It helps to truly understand what those business needs are, and then be able to tie our activities to the business results. So now we're able to measure, we're able to provide dedicated resources to knowledge management efforts, and then also helped us to refine our approach. And I know, Lindsay, you touched on it a little bit. It was more partnering with APQC, for example, partnering with others that had gone before us and were doing an excellent job at knowledge management and learning from them. So I do think those are the things that truly helped us to be able to start delivering the value.
Lindsay, what about you?
Yeah, I completely agree. That I'll share, we had a few different pilots that we ran with our critical standard setting process, the core work at USP. And I had one pilot that started delivering value right away, the very first week. And I have another pilot that it never came together. And what I noticed from those two was the level of complexity, how much are you trying to take on? And so for the one that delivered value right away, it was simply about pointing people to one single repository for critical knowledge rather than hunting and pecking through all sorts of different folders. And just that one simple improvement started saving hours of time searching a week, improved quality because people were using the same source of information. And so they were very focused, and they just had a simple objective, and they went about delivering on that right away. The other team was a little bit more murky on what it is they were trying to achieve. They were working on continuous improvement, and that can be a lot to bite off. And they ended up talking and learning about so many different continuous improvement activities that were already underway. And so their intent, their purpose got a little bit diluted. And so we had to step back and reassess what would be appropriate for our team to take on versus stepping away and allowing other initiatives that were already happening to continue on that path. So those were really important early learnings with these pilots, was not just what pilots were successful by nature, by the subjects they were trying to take on, but also by approach.
I feel like you guys are both talking about having some simple, straightforward goals and then sticking to them. So I was wondering if either of you have any advice on scope creep, and when the business comes to you with a variety of needs, and obviously you want to help them, how do you keep on track?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can chime in on that. I think we'd like to say that never happens to us, but that's not the case. But I do think overall, it's just being able to ask ourselves those difficult questions and being able to, be good stewards of the resources that we've been given. So, one example, would be that we've got, beginning of the year, as we're setting up our plan, based on where the organization is headed, we have identified the critical communities that we are going to help build and support based on our roadmap and where we're headed as an organization, because we've identified and we know that if we're able to do these 2 or 3 things well, these are the the benefits that we'll get across the organization. So when we get those little things that creep in, first we're asking ourselves, how does this help support what we wanted to achieve? And in some cases, we might find little wins that, yes, if we do this, then maybe it saves us time down the road. And those are the things that we can say, okay, well, we can take this on. But if it does not have, again, while it's a great thing to do, but if it's going to be a derailer and it's going to impact the things that we committed to doing, and that's where we ask ourselves the difficult questions and be able to, to have the conversations as well.
Yeah, there's a really good point in there, Tosin, about those things that are critical for you to do and you to lead as the KM leader. Maybe those things that other people can take on and run themselves. They can make some small improvements and you can advise. But then there's the secret layer of those things that might actually disrupt, the overall KM plans. And so you have to be on the lookout for those. I like to try to support where I can that other people can do their own initiatives and then try to plug them in. But it's those derailing ones that take a little bit more negotiation, I think.
I think that perfectly aligns with a lot of what we've seen in our research. So, and I think is a good transition into any challenges that you faced, and I'm particularly interested in ones that maybe you weren't expecting that surprised you along the way, and how you were able to, if prevail or if not prevail, at least work through those challenges. So, Lindsay, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So there were different interesting challenges along the way, but I'd say the biggest surprise for me was we had formed a cross-functional team working on these knowledge management approaches and the challenges that we wanted to solve. And I failed to explicitly call out roles and responsibilities. And so where that came back to surprise me was when it came time for a trial with a particular software tool that we wanted to try out. The IT resources, we weren't in the queue yet. We didn't have resources available to support the trial. And I had thought that by nature of including the IT staff in my cross-functional team, that was clear. Okay, get us a slot. But I didn't explicitly call out or enter into that project queue. And so that was a learning for me, that it wasn't enough to have them at the table, but it was to be explicit about what my needs and expectations were for them.
Tosin, what about you?
Thank you. That's a really good point, Lindsay. I think building off of that is, from a surprising perspective, it's with respect to leadership changes and just the time it takes to get new leaders on board. And so, from a KM perspective, if you've had leaders that you're working with and we know change is inevitable. And so knowledge management can be very theoretical. And as a KM person, I totally understand that. This is something that I'm passionate about. I live and breathe every day. This is the job that I do. But for someone who it's not their day-to-day, it can be very theoretical. And in some cases, could be a new subject depending on the new leader, and it could become very challenging to be able to crystallize truly what it means. And how do we kind of walk them through the journey that we've been on, the successes that we've had, the credibility that we've built? What does that look like? So I think it's just making sure that with that, we're keeping track of those results. That's one. But then from a credibility perspective, once that's established, it makes it very easier to be able to, to communicate it. And then I think the third part from that challenge is the business results. Like it's tough to argue with results. So, once you have the data and you have the results of here was the problem, here's what was done, here's how we were able to bridge the gap. I think it makes it so much easier, and they can then see, okay, I get it. I get what this means and what it does. I think one more challenge that I would add that was very surprising to me was the technology portion of it that we were working through. And I think that ties into Lindsay, what you were trying to say, with regards to getting the IT folks involved. So, we're not as mobile as we would like to be with our platform, but we've got the attitude of we're going to use it until we break it. But also, we started to look at technology, as an enabler and not necessarily a driver. So we were focusing on solutions that would support the technology that we have. So if we know that a solution requires it to be mobile, then maybe that's not what we're pushing now because we don't have it. And then we'll push it to those that are at their desk. They can get that information and then feed it to those that are out in the field. So we're continuing to advocate for new technology, but those are the two big challenges that we came across.
I want to piggyback off of that because I agree so much that I was presenting to one of our divisions last week at one of their staff meetings, talking about the knowledge management journey and what's ahead. And every time that I have told people, it's not just about technology. There are low-tech approaches that we can take today and that we've already taken to improve things. And you just see these smiles across the room because if you're not beholden to the technology to make it work, it's certainly an enabler, but it's not the driver. I love that point, Tosin. That just goes such a long way. And people feel reassured, okay, this isn't something I have to wait on. I can start doing it right away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we find that so often, whether people have great technology or mediocre technology in place, it's often not the biggest block. It's the people and process elements. But it's interesting listening to both of you speak because I feel like you're talking a little bit about technology challenges and especially the partnership, the roles and responsibility, the communication with IT. But also the communication with leadership and then the communication about technology. So, there's some definite themes there in terms of probably what other people should be aware of. And, especially as you are looking to put something like this in place to find, to look at how you're partnering with IT and clearly setting those roles and responsibilities, but also how you're communicating about the technology and the huge sort of communications and change management piece there as well. So I'm curious, do either of you guys have like a formal communication plan for knowledge management, or is that something that you handle more informally within the organization?
Right now, it's more informal. A communications plan is one of the next items ahead. That we're just a little bit resource constrained right now in having somebody who can take the time to plot that out fully. But we're leveraging the different people we have in our cross-functional groups. So we'll say, here's the message to take to your team. And so we're disseminating in that way.
Yes, I'll piggyback off of that. So we've got, I think for the program as a whole, we did put the communication plan on hold from when we put a strategy together a couple years ago. And, part of what we've done from a communication plan is it's built into some of the projects we're working on and some of the specifics of the communities that we're building and how we keep our stakeholders informed. So every, community, and I didn't say this before, but one of the solutions and the way we kind of build build out resources and KM capabilities is via communities of practice. And so we call them knowledge sharing communities. And so, based off of that, each one does have, as we develop the community, we do have a communication plan in place from just the development and then moving forward what that looks like.
Well, I just have one more question for you guys, and then we'll see if we have, time for a question from the audience, which is really what's next? What KM goals and projects are you taking on, in 2020 and beyond, and what's kind of next in your queue? So, Tosin, do you want to start us off on that one?
I am happy to. So I think part of what we've talked about is we're at a key decision point now because, we spent last year, building credibility. Now we have that. We have some, we have results that we can speak to. We have folks kind of pulling on us now, not that we're not pushing it at them. They're hearing about the things that are happening in other areas of the business and they want similar solutions. So, that's definitely a good place to be. And so, part of the decision point now is how far and how fast. And so what we're doing is we're putting together a steering team to help us be able to better make that decision. So we've got a cross-functional, group. We did have one about 2-3 years ago, and last year we kind of took a break and we were more focusing on just the little pieces that we had and staying with the results. And so now that we have that in place, it's just, how far do we go? How fast are we going to move? Those are key questions that we need to answer. And then just to also make sure we have the resources, to be able to keep up the momentum, because we, again, now that we've built the credibility, it's tough to build. It goes like that. So we just want to make sure we're able to, to keep that up. And then the other thing that I would add to that is we touched on it earlier. We are advocating for new technology. We are super close to moving to a new platform. So yay. Those are the two things that are top of mind for us.
Lindsay, what about you?
I can certainly relate to a lot of what Tosin shared. For us, it's shifting from a lot of planning and pilots to enterprise solutions. So getting that consistency that you talked about earlier, Lauren, how to have that same approach across the whole business rather than pockets of individual excellence. We want to take those best practices and share them more broadly. But again, focusing on critical pieces, not trying to drown everybody in everything all at once. So it's identifying best practices and sharing those through the communities, through our champions, through the communities of practice. And it's also, we've got baseline measures on something, so we want to continue to track. So it's scaling up and continuing the measurement.
Excellent. Well, I think we have just a couple of minutes. Do we have time for one question from the audience, Zakia?
Yeah, so we did have some questions come in, and I'll go ahead and start with that. So the first one is, what do you do about hostile or indifferent leaders?
And we talked about this a little bit, but yeah, the hostile and indifferent, and there may be two different answers there. But
Yeah.
All right, I'll take a first stab at it.
Okay.
So I would say again, so take this with the context is we the verbiage I want to use is and it's going to be in quotes right here. It's more kill them with kindness. And that's the mantra that we've adopted within knowledge management. We know it's tough. We know it might be challenging, but we stay very positive. We stay very kind. We understand, what our goals are and what we're tracking to, and we know how it benefits them. They just don't see it yet. And so we don't take it out on them. We take it out on the fact that they're just not informed. And how do we make sure we get them informed and get them on our side? And, we've got good successes to share with that.
Yeah, and I agree. And one of the things that with my boss and I she's co-presenting with me, and in preparing our presentation for the conference, we said, what does it take, not just in the what you accomplish, but how? And I think the how gets right to this piece with the hostile leaders or indifferent, that we talked about emotional intelligence and the importance that it plays in having our cross-functional group is getting the buy-in from these different areas, but also you have a broader network to put to your advantage when you come across these leaders. But maybe I don't have the working relationship or history with someone, but one of my peers on the cross-functional group does. And so I'll say, okay, Karen, how about you go talk to Christine and see if you can understand what's going on there, build on that relationship that you have, and then come back and we can problem solve together. But it's kind of marshaling your resources in different ways.
I think those are both great pieces of advice, and I think we're about at time.
We are.
So we probably have a few more audience questions that we didn't get to, but we will try to address those later, or we will do that at the conference. If anybody wants to hear more from Tosin and Lindsay and all of our other speakers, I hope you will join us for APTC's 2020 KM conference, which is taking place April 27th through May 1st in Houston. So thank you so much, Lindsay and Tosin, for taking the time to talk to us, and I look forward to seeing you in the spring.
Look forward to seeing you too. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.